Well, Jeremy, thank you for helping with my project. Could you say a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, my name's Jeremy R. Cox. I'm currently a college student at Kansas State University, home of the Kansas State Wildcats. I'm a history major with a minor in German. So just my kind of area of study is the best way to describe it is anything that goes boom, and the medical side of it that also goes with it. But looking at a master's degree, more than likely it's going to be space flight or just space history and what we've been doing since World War II.
Is most of your history studying in like the 1900s, or is there stuff before that that interests you?
I kind of go back to like I'll touch into like Spartan and Roman like battle tactics, but also medicine when it comes to the Romans and Greeks. But I dominantly study more uh, 20th century. So and as it's kind of hard to describe because I study such a broad range on my own. But as I get closer to graduation, I'm definitely looking at for my upcoming thesis being spaceflight, just because it's new, it's evolving, it's very dynamic. And I mean, kind of what we've been seeing with SpaceX is just like if it's not one if it's not one thing, it's another going on, and it's keeping us on our toes.
Absolutely. I like to think of the 2020s as maybe being to space exploration as the 1990s were to the internet.
Hmm.
And I was wondering if that analogy makes sense to you, and what do you think about that?
Yeah, I would actually agree. I was born in '96, so I was born during the heart of it. But you know, there has been a time that I didn't remember not having internet to a degree. I remember, when it was the old cable lines where my parents would tell me, "Hey, go and get on the computer. I'm on the phone, or if you're gonna be on the computer, play a game." Back before all those games required internet to play with it. So and I mean, I think also around this time 100 years ago, we had just, as we just got past the Great War, and Douglas, Boeing are really starting to transition more into commercial airliners. So I think that's kind of where we're at as well when it comes to, where we were 100 years ago to today.
So you're talking about like in 1920?
Yeah, the 1920s, like with the forward tri-motor, and then coming up in the 30s with the DC-3/C-47.
Oh, and I guess in terms of like passenger air flight before World War II, or even during World War II, I guess Casablanca is the only thing that I could think of. There's that picture of the tri-motor
Mm-hmm.
uh, taking them away. But so there was commercial air flight in 1920s?
Yeah, it was dominantly more for mail, but they were transitioning over to it because they realized that with mail service being what it is at the time, that they can, also do passengers. And then you fast forward to the 1930s, there's the Great Hurricane in 1938, I believe, in which the hurricane destroyed the rail lines going into by New York City. And so the only way they could get supplies in and relief workers was either by boat or by air. And air travel really took off right as World War II was getting ready to start.
But I guess the thing about air travel is you really needed to have runways. How
Mm-hmm.
many? How many? I guess you could. I guess you had open pasture and open fields and maybe roads you could use for that purpose. But were there many runways in the 1920s?
There were, but also at this time, they're also doing seaplanes.
Oh, that's
So
even better.
yeah, I mean, one of the famous seaplanes before World War II was the Boeing Clipper, and so Pan American had a line where they were flying all around. If you had water, you had a landing strip. I mean, the U.S. Navy didn't give up their seaplanes until the 1950s when the Air Force was starting to transition over to the strategic bombers.
Hmm.
And so, there's so much history with that leads up to where we're at now. It's just, I would love to write a book on it because there's just so much, in the span of from, when the Wright brothers took off to Ingenuity taking off on yesterday, there's just so much in there that it's hard to explain in 30 minutes.
Yeah, it's really amazing. I mean, I heard that comparison recently about Ingenuity. I think it flew like for 30 seconds or so,
Hmm.
and the first Wright brothers flight on Earth was like 12 seconds. I think that's right.
Yeah, it sounds about right. Oh, I think it's the U.S. Air Force's Globemaster aircraft. Its length is longer than the flight path of Kitty Hawk. So yeah, it's just truly fascinating. Um, I don't know about you, but I consider it a high honor to be able to be here at this time frame to witness such a remarkable transition in human history, that we are so close to making it to where people like you and I, I don't know your background, but I'm a more of a history major, so it's going to be a while before I ever get to fly, if I ever get to fly. And so, but I think the closer we get with commercial crew taking over a lot of the ferrying for NASA, and also Roscosmos when they work with us, it's going to make it easier for NASA to focus more on the bigger picture and let the private companies do more of take care of that.
And I mean, Gwen Shotwell just this past week said that she thought within the next 5 years, Starship would be flying a large number of people.
Yeah, I didn't see that, but I'm not surprised. Looking back at Artemis, and then combined with commercial crew, that everybody thought Boeing was going to get it, SpaceX was going to be essentially in the rear. But when you look at what SpaceX did, they just took their Cargo Dragon version and and they converted it. They made it more accessible for crew, and also to have that cargo ferry where the Soyuz can't have unpressurized cargo, and neither can Boeing.
Hmm.
So they really kind of they flipped the tables on these, on Boeing, who for the longest time has been one of the main suppliers, going clear back to before Mercury. So it's definitely very interesting.
Yeah, I mean, whenever you think about the 2010s and what SpaceX has been able to deliver, I mean, you got the Falcon 1, the Falcon 9,
Mm-hmm.
um, commercial resupply, reusing Falcon 9 first stages, catching fairings, the Falcon Heavy, the
Mm-hmm.
commercial crew, and now the Starship prototype.
Yeah, it's incredible. I was born during the height of the shuttle era, and so I never thought that we could build anything bigger than the Saturn V, or that a private company wouldn't be able to do this. That it was, things of Star Trek or Star Wars, or all those more sci-fi type fantasies. But just to see how far we've gone, that I should have known. I should have known better as a student of history, that when we want to do something bigger, more bolder, we're going to build it. We're going to build a machine bigger and better. But to be honest, I've been practicing what I'm going to say about this because I was just so nervous. But I remember last year when they did the tests and everything leading up to when they declared, I'm like, hey, this is the date, or this is the time frame we're going to fly with SLS-1. And I'm still very nervous about. I'm not worried about so much like the SRBs, because they've been flight proven. They flew on shuttle missions. They've flown, and the company that works with them are, it's flight tested. And same thing with the SR-25 engines. And I think even one OMS engine from Atlantis is going to be for the main propulsion for the service module. But where I'm nervous is the guidance system. As you remember with Starliner, they mentioned how the guidance system was very similar, if not identical, to what's going to be on Orion. And so that kind of got me worried. Was like, it's taken this long to get to SLS-1. And if we mess up, there's a good chance it's going to push us back even further. And everything we did up to this point is going to be for nothing. It's going to be SpaceX or, Blue Origin, or a couple of those other companies that are going to take the lead.
But ultimately, I mean, what's the future of SLS? Because I mean, you spend $1 billion to use a spacecraft for less than 10 minutes.
Hmm. Yeah, I think it's just NASA sticking to what they know best, of not working on reusable, that they're not there yet. They don't feel comfortable with it right now. And I think they're kind of just waiting to see how SpaceX is doing it and how we can do it with, or how they can do it with Starship. And then with United Launch Alliance with the Vulcan rocket, they're looking at doing the same thing, after it's flown several flights with their design, and Blue Origin as well. So, everybody's kind of getting the idea of like, okay, look at what SpaceX is doing. They're saving tons of money. They're getting these contracts for half the amount, but it's like it's costing, for us as taxpayers, and not as much money compared to what it used to be with a single use launch vehicle.
Yeah, I think I read something like Artemis 1, if you consider all the development costs and everything, is going to be like $35 billion.
Oh, that is. I don't know how much the Apollo program cost, but ugh. And also perfect timing when I was taking a drink of tea. Perfect
Sorry.
timing. Oh no, that's actually good. No, but I think in the end, we need to establish a permanent presence on the moon to get us ready to go to Mars. I think, it's ultimately, we're taking everything we've learned as a species, both the United States and Russia, even though the Russians aren't a part of the Artemis program, like, Australia or New Zealand or ESA, but, when it comes down to it, we all share the same planet. We all still call this home. And that, come November, when we do launch, it's just going to be a way of kind of restarting the space race, picking things back up. That, like what we saw with the Cold War, the competition is what kept the Cold War from going hot. Yes, we were fighting proxy wars, but a lot more people were focused on the space aspect of it. That's like, okay, let's try to go to the moon. And when the United States beat the Soviets, they did, as of yesterday, was the 50th anniversary of Salyut 1. And so it's just that friendly competition between nations, but also while working together for the eventually Mir and then the ISS. It's just it's a good peaceful way for nations to work to coexist, so to speak. That we may have our tensions here on Earth, but then once we get into space, it's neutral ground.
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely been a lot more cooperation and fraternity between our astronauts in space than everybody else down here. But um, at the same token, we've only sent scientists and engineers and um, people, test pilots and non-military. Well, I mean, even military people that we send have been in a non-military capacity. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
but as we start putting bases and doing operations on the moon, you could kind of see that maybe there might be some change to that.
Yeah, and I could easily see it. Are you a fan of? Do you watch For All Mankind on Apple TV Plus?
Yes, I'm right at the one where they're about to send up the Marines.
Oh, I've been watching it week by week, so I'm not going to give you spoilers. But yeah, I could easily see what the show is kind of describing, to where we've got the Russians' moon base bugged and they've got ours bugged, and vice versa, and to where it's kind of like, hey, this is our mining site, get away, type deal. But hopefully it doesn't come to where in the future where we don't have to involve firearms in space. But who knows what the future is going to bring with this. I
Yeah,
personally hope.
all you need in space is just a rock traveling fast
Mm-hmm.
enough.
Yeah, you're gonna love where it gets to. I was watching the episode for this past week when Kate Rubins and the Sergeys were coming down from the station, and that was nerve wracking, because I'm following that in real life. our cooperation is good. The Cold War has been long since over, since the 90s, and we're cooperating in space. But then on the show, it's just like, wow, this could actually happen, or this could have happened. But it's just really cool from a historical standpoint to see like Sea Dragon, to see Buran, and even see the shuttles like Columbia still flying in a way, so that even though we've lost Challenger and Columbia, that their spirits are still kind of living on today in the show. And that it's like, for when somebody doesn't know spaceflight that watches the show and they look up Columbia or Enterprise online, it's like, oh wow, these were actual real spacecraft, spaceships.
I'm really concerned of somebody not knowing spaceflight watching that show, because
Yeah.
they would walk away with a completely different idea. They're like, I don't know what happened to our moon base.
Yeah, and I have to keep telling myself, going like, okay, this is fiction, this isn't real life. There are a lot of similarities, but we don't fly Sea Dragon. That got scrapped fairly early on, and then the shuttle has been long since retired, and they're in museums, and the remnants of Challenger and Columbia are in museums.
Yeah, indeed. I've been volunteering at Space Center Houston 1 weekend a month.
Mm-hmm.
It's here in right next to the Johnson Space Center, and
Yeah.
um, we have so many artifacts there. We have like Mercury capsule, a Gemini capsule, an Apollo capsule, and we had the 747 that flew the shuttle between places and was used for the the gliding test. And I'm so looking forward for that facility shifting from being more of a history, backwards looking thing to being what's going on now in the future.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm actually from Hutchinson, Kansas, where we have the Cosmosphere and Space Center. So I mean, I'm in the same boat. I've seen the Liberty Bell 7. I've seen a couple of the Gemini. I've seen the Apollo 13 Command Module Odyssey countless times. So I understand where you're coming from, and I would love to get down to Johnson to see see how much has changed since the early 2000s when I visited. But as we push, kind of to go to your next question about with the astronauts type deal, and with also like with the Dear Moon project, I put my hat in the ring. I don't think I'm going to get it. I don't know about you, whether or not did you put your hat in the ring, sir?
I did, but I didn't get that follow-up email of the one about doing the videos, which apparently
Mm-hmm.
some have gotten. So I think I put as my artistic ability was these interviews. So maybe that
Mm-hmm.
wasn't convincing enough.
I put mine as a college student, but I'm also a forestry firefighter by trade. So I've fought forest fires out on the West Coast. And that was kind of my interpretation is that, you and I both benefit heavily from the technology that NASA has helped develop with our international partners. And when you look at the volcano eruption in Barbados, I did some research for a friend of mine who's from there, and I was able to kind of dive into more of it, and just going like, yeah, NASA's known about this for a while. They've already sent teams to help prepare for this. It's not like we as our civilians may have been caught off guard, but the higher ups, they were not off guard. They were not caught off guard. They were like, okay, this may happen.
Talking about volcanoes, I look at the globe, and you can like turn the globe in such a way that pretty much the Pacific Ocean takes up an entire face of it.
Mm-hmm.
And then you consider how Hawaii was built, with like the volcanoes and lava building up.
Mm-hmm.
And then you think, why couldn't we like rupture the crust in the Pacific and actually create like another continent?
And I think that could. I don't personally know at this current time if that's feasible. I guarantee you, there's probably some weird sci-fi deals where they've probably done in some sci-fi universe. But it's, who knows? That would be interesting. If we did it tomorrow, I don't think we would live to see it be fully constructed by the time that lava got cooled. But I think it's definitely with everything going on this month and what's been going on since since demo 2 last year, it's just incredible. I wish I could be down at the Cape, not only for Thursday but also for Artemis 1 to see that in person, to hear the SRB, those 4 space shuttle engines ignite, and then the SRBs, and just going like, wow, the grandson of the Saturn V has life and is on its way.
But Elon is talking about Starship making it to orbit in the July timeframe.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think if that happens?
I'm skeptical to a point, but I've also, from following Elon and SpaceX for many years now, I wouldn't put him past him. I really wouldn't. That we're launching, and I keep saying this as if you and I are part of SpaceX, but it's just so much easier, as from one space enthusiast to the other. I wouldn't put it past him. I think Elon is very ambitious. He has set the bar really high to get Starship up into orbit and get it flying, and to test those components that need to be tested before the Dear Moon project lifts off within the next year or so, but also for when we start flying manned missions to the lunar surface. It's going to need to be tested, and SpaceX has put up a majority of the cost up front, and so I think I wouldn't put it past him. He's set the bar high, particularly for Blue Origin, their biggest competitor. Well, that in ULA, he set the bar high. That it's going to be interesting to see what the next 5 years look like, whether if SpaceX is still on top or if it's a combination of the 3.
But I don't see. I mean, if SpaceX is even half as successful as they're planning, I don't see how any of the other ones compete with them.
Yeah, I mean, I support everybody across the board when it comes to I love to see competition between SpaceX, ULA, Rocket Lab for the small satellite business, and then also with ULA with the I'm guessing you have your name on Mars as well with Perseverance and Ingenuity.
I'm not sure if I actually, I thought about it. I saw everybody else doing it, but I don't remember if I actually did that.
I did. So it was kind of, but I think, the future is bright for space as a whole, that hopefully the next 20 years or so, maybe less, that the cost will be down, or maybe only $15,000, $20,000 to fly. And you have to train for 6 months so you can get fly to low Earth orbit, or if you pay $200,000 to fly to the moon and walk on the surface. So I mean, I think what the SpaceX is doing right now is pretty much changing the game to where the DC-3 was in the 1930s, going through World War II and into the jet age. It's getting worse. At least I'm seeing this. I don't know about other professional space historians, but that's how I'm seeing it as a student of history.
Yeah, I like back to the analogy of the 2020s being to space what the 1990s were to the internet.
Mm-hmm.
I would say the Starship is probably the Netscape browser would be the equivalent. It's kind of.
Sorry.
I was just going to say it's kind of the vehicle that makes it happen.
And I would have to agree. I barely remember the 90s. I born in the 90s, grew up in the 2000s. But I would have to agree, just because it takes one spark to ignite a fire to get it building big. And with all what Starship is doing, what Crew Dragon, well, Cargo and Crew Dragon both have done, and what they will do in the upcoming flights, and then once Starliner gets up to speed and competing with SpaceX for spots on the Harmony module on the station, I think it's just going to be incredible. I've lost a lot of hours of sleep to watch these launches, but it's always worth it in the end.
I think if I remember right, Boeing's charging um, NASA like $90 million per astronaut. Russia was charging something like $80 million per astronaut, and SpaceX is charging $55 million per astronaut. With those price differences, and the fact that the SpaceX can carry unpressurized cargo, as you mentioned, where do you see the competition?
I see, Boeing and then also Roscosmos as well, kind of having to take a look at what they're doing and just going like, wow, we've got, the United States has SpaceX that they can do the best of both worlds, similar to the shuttle, where it could carry both astronauts and unpressurized cargo, and that it's making things easier for NASA. It's also making it easier on their wallet for their budgets. That Endeavor is getting ready to fly again, and SpaceX has completely changed the spaceflight world upside down, but for a good way. They've completely changed it in a new direction.
Absolutely. And do you remember how you found out about Artemis and our plans to go to the moon by 2024?
I kind of, I it's been a while, but like I remember hearing about Orion and what they were doing as clear back in the early 2000s when I was in elementary school. But then within the last few years, when Jim Bridenstine was NASA administrator, and when all the stuff is going on with with Demo 2 and leading up to that, then I started really paying attention to it when they announced it. I watched the press conference live when they announced Orion and when they announced the Artemis program. And so, I like what Jim Bridenstine said, that, we're going to be launching American astronauts on American rockets from American soil. That's what SpaceX is doing, is just the beginning. And that when Artemis lifts off with SLS-2, and then, the future missions that follow it, it's just going to be a continuation of that everything we've learned from Mercury through the shuttle era and commercial crew and the ISS and Mir is all getting applied to this with Artemis. And it's, as a historian or an image, it's historian in training, I am looking forward to just seeing what we can do in space. I think it's, in the midst of this pandemic, it's space flight that's kept America and a lot of other people sane. Seeing the curvature of the Earth or seeing the boosters land, it's just, it gives you something to think about else.
Yeah, no, indeed. Let's see. Some people are questioning, why are we sending astronauts to the moon whenever we have a pandemic and we have poverty and hunger and all these other issues? Um, how would you go about sort of addressing that point of view?
Well, it's definitely a tough question, but how I would address it would be that yes, we have the poverty and everything that's currently going on in the midst of a pandemic, but look at the steps we've taken to make for safety of our astronauts and the safety of the ground crew that work with them directly. They're doing masks, they're doing it over Zoom. We've got the vaccine now in place, with 2 vaccines currently still operational, with one needing to get completely changed over. But then with the poverty side, a lot of the way influences we've made to help poverty has been through spaceflight. That nutrition and what the human body can do, we only knew so much prior to long-term spaceflight. Whether it was with the Apollo or Mir or Skylab, the shuttle, now the space station. Because if we completely turn away and focus on the problems here on Earth, then one of our adversaries, Russia, China, or heck, even ESA, will take over that spot and make it extremely hard for the United States to catch back up. That we have to maintain, a role in space to continue to be that leader of the free world. That we're continually not only to help, on a broad scale, but also on a small scale. What we know about nutrition and what we've learned, I have a family member that has, I can't remember exactly what it is, but I remember talking to her, and going like, hey, a lot of the information that the doctors have, what we've learned on the space station has helped your physicians treat you. So you're, how, because we're seeing all the time with astronauts coming from the space station. I mean, it's a very sticky subject, but I mean, they had the same argument during the Apollo era, same with the shuttle, and even today, they think poverty, we should put more to hunger, and we are. But also, I don't want to go down party lines, so I'm gonna stay away from that and focus on the bigger picture of spaceflight.
There's some people that are concerned that space is only going to be for the elite, the very rich, the very lucky, and that it really won't be for the mass people. What are your thoughts there? Is that a concern?
It is a concern of mine, particularly right now, because in order to fly in the Soyuz or even Crew Dragon, you have to have, at least $50 million. Or if you're going to fly to the station on board Soyuz or Crew Dragon, I think at least with Soyuz is like 27 or something like that $1 million. And Roscosmos is getting ready to add a thing where you get to do a spacewalk in the Orlon suits. I think at the beginning, it is going to be strictly for the elite, for the rich or for the lucky that get to fly. But as technology further progresses, then the masses will be able to fly. Prior to the Trimotor and the DC-3, it was only for the rich that could fly. We had to take the train, to get from one place to another. And so I think we're going to see that at first, but then as our technology progresses, as we learn to live long-term in space on the moon, and then we eventually make that our run from Mars, then we're going to see the masses start coming. Tourism to the moon, to where there might be tour companies where it's going like, hey, visit all of the Apollo landing sites, take pictures in front of the lunar lander from Apollo 11. So, I mean, for right now, it's going to be the elites and those that are lucky enough to fly. But 20 years down the road, I got to believe it's going to be for people like you and me. That if we want to fly, it's like, oh, I'm working on a book for space and I want to go, spend 6 months on the moon or 6 months on the space station to give me a better idea of how to convey to my readers, this is what it's like to live in space. This is what it's like, to work on the moon. It's one thing to write a book having never flown, but it's another to write a book about spaceflight with the background that you have flown in space, that you have experienced microgravity.
Yeah, definitely. I actually got to take one of those zero-G flights, the Vomit Comet.
Mm-hmm.
So I've actually experienced free fall at for 30 seconds at a time, and it's kind of funny relating my experiences to what I read in some sci-fi books. It's like not really connected. There's no sense of falling. It's just lack of weight. So I definitely get your point. And I know that if it was safe and affordable, you would go to space because you applied for their moon.
Mm-hmm.
But not everybody's been so anxious to go into space. And I was wondering, what are some fears that might keep people from actually going into space?
I think, one of them is that one false move and you could easily die. I had a friend of mine who I asked, would you want to fly into space? And she said, no, I wouldn't. It would be like being deep underwater in a submarine, to where the environment around you, whether it's below the surface of in the ocean or in space, everything to keep you alive is inside that submarine or inside the spaceship. But I think also, there are just some people that would much rather not want to fly. They would much rather read about it or play a video game to experience it, or at least get an idea of it. And then you got others such as, you and I, who are both space enthusiasts. We want to fly, and that if there's a possible chance that we can go, we're gonna try to make it happen.
Absolutely. Though, as some options have come up that are, kind of just within reach, but would be kind of economically crushing. Like,
Hmm.
Virgin Galactic, for example,
Hmm.
$250,000 for maybe an hour to 2 hour trip, where maybe 15 minutes of that is actually in space and free fall. That is not beyond the realm of reaching. But whenever you think about the opportunity cost of that $250,000, you're like, maybe I do better buying a plane. I could like fly that around and get a lot more out of it than I could just that experience one time.
Yeah, I completely agree that, if you and I only get one trip to space, I would much rather have it be, to the moon or spend it, 6 months on the space station versus like with Blue Origin going, being up in space for maybe 2 or 3 minutes above the Kármán line and then come back. Because 3 minutes, you're barely getting a taste of it. But a couple weeks, then you're really starting to see it.
I know you're like get something in your eye. You're like trying to clean it out. You're like, I'm losing my my short
Uh-huh.
time.
Oh yeah, that. Oh, what happened to Luca Parmitano with Chris Cassidy on that? I think Expedition 35 when they were doing a spacewalk, I believe.
Hmm. Is that what the water?
Yeah.
Yeah. That is something else. Well, I really appreciate your time. Is there anything that you wanted to talk about that we didn't get to?
Not really. I think I would actually love to get a copy of this recording or just so I could show my friends and family because this is like my first space interview ever.
Yeah, for sure. I put all these interviews on countdowntothemoon.org, and I
Okay.
can send you the link to this one,
Hmm.
for sure. And I kind of see these interviews as not being really. I mean, I would love to people to watch them today, but kind of the audience I have is for people like you, historians 100 years from now, wondering what were people thinking before this new space age, before people started going into space routinely. And if you could imagine a historian 100 years from now in 2121,
Hmm.
wow, 2121, that's great. Um, what would you want that historian to know about today's time that they might miss?
What I what I would want them to know, it would, I actually thought about this question as well. Is like I want them to understand how far we've come. That for my future descendants or my younger cousins who are still in diapers right now, I want them to understand that we've come a long way in a span of roughly 60 years from the flight of Vostok 1 and with Alan Shepard going up. And that I want them to know that what we are doing right here, right now, April 20th, 2021, was that we were trying to get us to become an interplanetary species. That it took a lot of hard work for us to achieve that. But yet, assuming in 2021, we're already on Mars and that we have colonies both on the lunar surface and on Mars, I want them to understand and know that we did everything we possibly could. That, I'm wearing my NASA shirt today, for this occasion, but, for all mankind, you get all these movies and video games, like computer simulators, like Orbiter Reentry. I don't know if you've gotten to play that.
Mm-mm.
Very complex. Mercury is easy. Gemini is a little bit more challenging. Apollo 13 doesn't do it justice with the amount of checklists. It's complex, but it's giving people more of a taste of it. And that I just want, if I was a historian 100 years from now, and I'm writing a book on the early days of human space flight, I would definitely be looking at these interviews as a first person account. That, yes, a lot of them may have never flown or gotten to fly in their lifetime, but they were still aware of what they were doing. This is what they thought of it. Kind of how historians, when we look at World War One, Two, the Great War, or even with space flight, where these astronauts and soldiers, sailors, airmen, Marines had diaries and journals that they wrote in to convey what they were going through that particular day and time. And I think this is kind of going to become a first-person digital narrative of this.
It just occurred to me that those soldiers were in wars before the iPhone and before video
Mm-hmm.
games and before recorded movies and all these things. And I gotta imagine that they wrote in their journals as sort of like a way to escape, something, a
Mm-hmm.
way to pass the time. And I gotta think that today's soldiers and military people and what have you in a similar situation, we may not have any records of their time because they would spend it doing other diversionary activities.
Yeah, and there, we are seeing a lot of that to a point, but then you also get like Matt Best with Black Rifle Coffee or Marcus Luttrell, who have wrote books on their experience long after they gotten out of the military. Or Clayton Anderson's wrote a book. All these astronauts, they're using the historical archives from their experience with NASA to publish the book. Because for me as a upcoming historian, those are the type of deals I'm gonna pull from to write that book, because they give us the best idea of what they were experiencing.
Yeah, indeed. And memory is something we're constantly editing. Like
Mm-hmm.
as we sort of fit past events into the context of the arc of our lives, we're constantly tweaking and it becomes kind of fungible.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's truly amazing the age we live in right now.
Well, I really appreciate your time and thank you again for participating in my project, and I'll be sure and send you the link as soon as it's up there.
All right. Thank you very much, sir, and live long and
Live long and
prosper.
prosper. I wish I could do that. I kind of have to.
It took a lot of time. I can do with both hands, but I figured since this was space, do the Spock sign as a,
Yeah,
yeah, there you go. You got it.
kind of.
As just kind of a formal way to end, as an informal way to end this meeting. So,
Absolutely. Okay. Bye-bye.
yeah, bye.